And Cynthia, you wrote a piece yesterday about some of the prosecution and what that approach might be. The president echoed what Eric Schneiderman said earlier, saying prosecution alone is not enough, but prosecution is part of it. Tell us about your story.
Yeah, this is a really interesting case. So John Kapoor, the founder of Insys Pharmaceuticals, has been charged with racketeering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and the issues are that, or the case that's being brought against him is that he and top executives from his companies bribed doctors to write prescriptions for opioids with things like speaker fees and marketing fees and other ways that they could use the system of paying doctors in other ways to get them to prescribe what is a very powerful opioid, fentanyl. And basically we're prescribing it in the prosecution's case to patients that didn't necessarily need it, or it wasn't the right drug for them. And so while Schneiderman said very interestingly we can't prosecute our way out of it, it certainly seems like this is the time right now. This is actually going to be the tactic. And perhaps it's backward looking, but it is one way to maybe enforce some standards, I guess, and also it's really rattling the market. You're seeing other companies are shaken now, and shares are moving in any company that's an opioid producer involved in these cases.
Exactly, that's what I wonder about. In fairness, what Eric Schneider was saying was he does want to prosecute it, it's just that in itself is not enough, and he needs federal help. But do we have a sense of how broad this problem might be? Does it go beyond just this specific instance of Insys?
Well, I think that's going to play out in the next couple months. There's another case against Purdue that's being built right now about whether or not that was criminal behavior in the marketing of the opioids, if they knew that the drugs were more addictive or didn't last as long as they said, and things of that nature. And so I guess as those cases are built out, it'll lay the groundwork to understand what could be brought against companies like Endo or companies like J&J, who are also caught up in some of the litigation in states like Ohio, and that could continue to play out with cases around the country. Prosecution definitely is not the only way, but it is definitely the one that the markets are paying a lot of attention to, because some of the things in the executive order that might, in Trump's move, that might allow for more telemedicine or more funding of counselors, et cetera, they're not huge dollar move, like they're not market movers, and they're just going to be potential solutions and perhaps avenues, but it wasn't nearly as much in terms of the funding push that I think some people worried about this crisis have been hoping.
One of the things the president talked about yesterday was CVS agreeing that they'd limit the first-time subscription to just 7 days, I think it was, worth. Actually, Eric Schneiderman said that they are doing that in New York State, across the entire state, not just with CVS, but in general, to limit, because one of the issues is people get so many pills.
Yeah, it's actually amazing it's taken this long to get to this point. I think people have started to realize this problem years ago, and this problem of overprescribing and an abundance of longer-term prescriptions, but that was also part of the fundamental shift with the opioid usage in America. It started from being something that doctors had a very kind of a tentative approach to. They thought it was highly addictive, and then when the thinking changed in the medical community that it could be used for chronic pain, suddenly you were getting these long-term prescriptions. So dialing that back to shorter-term prescriptions, tracking, paying closer attention to the doctors who are prescribing it, these are all really meaningful steps for the end game, for the users that are potentially.
Particularly because, unlike some substance abuse, by and large, the people who become addicted to this started out legally. They had a pain, they had a surgery, they had something they had to do, and it expands out. It's different from a lot of other illicit drugs.
Yeah, I think it's actually what makes it such a hard and complex issue to tackle, because you're talking about kids who may get hooked on opioids from a surgery, from a sports injury, or something of that nature, where, I mean, really vulnerable populations are ending up on opioids, and people who really aren't necessarily going to fall into a group of potential like drug addicts in any other way. So I think that's also why this idea that it's a crisis and it needs national attention is really rising to the fore, because it's hitting so many communities in so many ways.